All right, y'all. I'm bedhead, bedbeard, 4 o'clock in the morning. Usually I record these on Sundays. I'm not today for reasons. When we left off last week, we had we had finished up with the creation of the orcs by Melkor. And it says here this was the vilest deed of Melkor and the most hateful to Iluvatar because he basically took what Iluvatar had created, the firstborn, and he corrupted them. And I remember there being a really interesting discourse with some of the writers and showrunners for Rings of Power about, we should sympathize with the orcs, and it's not fair of Tolkien to have cast the orcs as this evil, vile race because that's racist, and elves, orcs are people too, kind of dialogue of, we need to have strong orc characters to show diversity on screen, and I remember they were touting like these female orc warriors who were going to have an important part of the storyline, and the way it was being discussed was that somehow these orcs were more than just bad people, and they had their own society, and they were deserving of redemption and all this other stuff. And I was like, I don't think you understand Tolkien, because in the scope of Tolkien, Melkor is the ultimate evil. He is Satan, irredeemable, not capable of being redeemed. He is the ultimate evil. And the first orcs were the spawn of that ultimate evil. You could feel pity for those first orcs because they were at one point in time elves who had just been tortured and corrupted with dark magic. But the nuance here is that um, they multiplied and had life after the manner of the children of Iluvatar, meaning they bred, they copulated, and had offspring, which means only the first generation of orcs were the ones that were corrupted from elves. Everything that came after that were orcs, bred and born. There's nothing redeemable there. There is nothing to redeem. They are the spawn of evil, bred from evil. They don't know anything but evil, and they are incapable of good in the context of the story. That's something that's very important to be understood because in this book and in this world, there is a very clear white and dark, light and good, light and dark, good and evil. That's what I meant to say. You can't simply try to change the narrative on that because you want to modernize the story. It doesn't work like that. We can't have, there is no gray, so to speak, in that part of the discussion. But it was an interesting thing to try to see people behind Rings of Power spinning their wheels and trying to come up with an excuse for why orcs should be considered not evil. Because it's like, no, that's not how this works. They are evil, born and bred, pure and simple. That's not racist. This is a fantasy world. We're not talking about a race of people. We're talking about a corrupted thing that is not really in the grand scope of things. It's not they are not children of Iluvatar anymore. They are a corrupted thing that is meant to be cleansed from the land. It's like rot. Rot in your body is never going to be redeemable ever. You cut the rot out, you get the rot out, you get rid of it, you heal the wound. That's the end of the story. The orcs are a rot on the world, as is Melkor and Sauron and everything else. Nothing there to be redeemed. The next part here gets into Orome tarrying while among the Quendi before riding back over the land and sea to Valinor and bringing these tidings back to Valmar. Speaking of the things that troubled Cuivianen, says the Valar rejoiced, but there was doubt mixed in there because they weren't sure of how to guard the Quendi from the shadow of Melkor. But eventually Orome returned to Middle-earth and stayed with the elves. And on the flip side of that, you've got Manwë sitting upon Tenochtitl, seeking the counsel of Iluvatar, and finally coming down to Valmar and summoning the Valar to the Ring of Doom. And even Ulmo came in. Remember we talked about this earlier. Ulmo kind of just stayed out, but he would occasionally show up for councils. So this is one of those moments when he's showing up for a council and saying, hey, things are bad. I'll partake. What's interesting here is Manwë doesn't say that he actually talked to Iluvatar. He says, this is the counsel in my heart, meaning that this is my interpretation of the things that I think I heard after reflection and meditation. We need to take up again the mastery of Arda, no matter the cost, and deliver the Quendi from Melkor. Tolkos is glad, Aule was grieved. because he was foreseeing the damage to the world that is going to come as a part of this war. But they came out then from Valar, it says, from a man in the strength of war, resolving to assault the fortress of Melkor. This is interesting here. It says Melkor never forgot that the war was made for the sake of the elves and that they were ultimately the cause of his downfall, despite the fact that they had no part in his deeds. So he met the Valar in the northwest of Middle Earth, and all that region was destroyed. First victory of the West was swift. Melkor's servants fled to Autumno. The Valar chased them, setting a guard over Quivian. And even though it says here, it says the Quindi knew nothing of this battle. They just know that the earth shook and groaned beneath them. So imagine if I can liken this to some of the mythology around and please forgive me if I don't have a politically correct term for this. It's the First Nations. The I don't mean this in an insulting way, but when you look at the indigenous cultures of any given, I'm more familiar with North America, right? So, but also because I have a homestead in Mexico, my wife is of Mexican and Mayan descent. When you look at any indigenous culture that is local, by indigenous, I'm not meaning that in a racist term. I mean that in they are local to that environment. They are the people who grew up there. They all have myths and legends about when the gods are angry, the earth shakes, there's earthquakes, volcanic explosions, hurricanes, all these things. And that's essentially what we're reading of here is that the Quendi knew nothing of what was going on. They just knew that the earth was groaning beneath them. Waters were moving. There were lights in the northern sky, mighty fires in the distance that they didn't know about. The siege of Autumno was long and grievous. Grievous is all it says here. And many battles were fought before its gates, of which naught but rumor is known to the elves. By the way, is it ever described how long the siege of Autumno is? Because here it just says long and grievous, but it doesn't say how long, how many years. Middle Earth's shape changed. The great sea was sundered. It from a man grew wider and deeper. Made a deep gulf in the south. Many lesser bays were created. The Bay of Valar was the chief. Into the mighty river Sirion flowed down from the new raised highlands northward. So this is talking about a bunch of the lands being made desolate and changing. It says where Autumno was delved exceeding deep, and its pits filled with fires and smoke, and great hosts of the servants of Melkor. But at last the gates were broken, the halls unroofed, and Melkor took refuge in the uttermost pit. And Tulkas then stood forth as the champion of the Valar, and cast him down upon his face, bound him with the chain Anganor that Aule had brought, and led them captive forth. And it says the world had peace for a long age. But despite the victory, they did not discover all of the vaults and caverns underneath Angband and Autumno, and many things still lingered in the dark there, while others fled out into the rest of the world, including Sauron, who they did not find. But when the battle was ended, great clouds arose in the north, it says, hid the stars. The Valar took Melkor back to Valinor, bound hand, foot, and blindfolded, and brought him to the Ring of Doom, where he laid upon his face before the Manwë and asked for forgiveness. But his prayer was denied, it says, and he was cast into prison under Mandos, where none can escape, neither Vala, elf, nor mortal man. Doomed there to abide for 3 ages long before his cause could be tried anew, or she'd plead again for pardon. I have a question for those of you who are experts on Tolkien here, or more experts than I am, because I'm just learning about rereading this stuff. It says Melkor was doomed to abide here for 3 ages long. Is this referring to the first, second, and third age? I may be getting ahead of myself. It may explain this later on. Unless he should plead again for pardon, it says. Because that was a question I asked. Oh, I think it was at the end of when we were reading the Return of the King. I asked, are Melkor and Sauron actually destroyed, or are they just bound for all eternity until the end of time? I don't, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. That's why I'm asking if anybody knows, because I've not read, and I probably won't read all the other stuff after this. We'll see. The Valar gather in council. They have a great debate. Deciding that the Quindi should now be left free to walk as they wanted to in Middle Earth to heal the land and their hurts. But many feared the Quindi. Hang on, I gotta make sure I understand what they're saying here. Okay, so for the most part, they feared for the Quindi because the world was dangerous in the dusk of the post-war. And it says here, at last they summoned the Quindi to Valinor to gather in the light of the trees forever. And Mandos broke his silence and says, "So it is doomed." Why? It says, from the summons came many woes that afterwards befell. I'm not quite sure what we're referring to here. The elves were not willing at first because they had only seen the Valar in their wrath as they went to war, and so they were terrified. Apart from Arome. Okay. So Arome went down to them, picked some ambassadors, Engwe, Finwë, Elwë, who afterward were known as kings. They were then taken to Valar, shown the trees and everything else. Then they went back to Cuiviénen and counseled the elves to remove themselves into the west. But this is where it says the first sundering of the elves occurred. The kindred of Engwe and most of the kindreds of Finwë and Elwë were swayed by these words and were willing to depart, and were known as the Eldar after this fact. Oh, but others refused the summons, preferring the wide spaces of Middle Earth. These were known as the Avari. Quick commercial break, everyone, to give a shout out to our first official guild officer, Babylonia, as well as all of the guild champions, and of course, all of the members who help keep me on the air full time. To join as a member, simply click that join button below and pick your tier, but you can also support with super chats on any live stream or premiere, or super thanks on any upload or YouTube short. Don't forget the Discord. Let's get back to the video. Okay, sundered in that time and never met again until many ages were past. Huh. The Eldar then began to march, arrayed in 3 hosts under the 3 kings, led by Ingwe, who is known as the Most High Lord of the Elvish race. Huh. He says he never came back or looked again upon Middle Earth after this. The Vanyar were his people, known as the Fair Elves. Next were the Noldor, the people of Finwë, known as Deep Elves or the Friends of Aule. And then the greatest host was the last. They were known as the Teleri. And they says they took a while to get there because they weren't exactly sure that they wanted to go into the dusk to the light of Valinor. And they took great delight in the water, and when they saw the sea, they became enamored, became known as the Sea Elves, or the Fomari. They had Elwë and Olwë. Oh man, there's so much name dropping here. It's really hard to keep track of all of this. It says there were then 3 kindreds of the Thali. Oh my goodness. The Colquindi, Elves of the Light, but others of Eldar set out. Kindred of the Teleri, dwelt by the sea. These elves, the Colquindi, called the Umanyar. And the Umanyar and Avari alike, they call the more Quindi, elves of darkness, for they never beheld the light that was before the sun and moon. Okay. That's a lot to unpack and a lot of name dropping. So let's that's a good stopping point. There's a whole bunch of section that's going to come after this point. But we do get a discussion now upon the sundering of the elves. It said here, let me go back on this. I think it says this is the first sundering of the elves. Then befell the first sundering of the elves. So we're going to get more later. More to come. Like, subscribe, hit the bell icon. If you know more than I do, please drop that information down in the comments below so that we can continue to learn and relearn the Silmarillion. If you like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. We generally do these on Mondays, thus the term Mondays in Middle Earth for this show. We've been doing this for quite a while now. Hopefully you've been enjoying it along the way. And if you're new, don't forget to check out the playlists down below. Check out all the other things we do here on the channel. There's a playlist for Dune. We're currently doing a Dune series very similar to this. And of course, all the games, TV shows, book reviews, and etc. There's a Discord. We're live streaming, multi-streaming these days on Twitch and YouTube and other stuff. So see you in the next one. Until then, everybody, stay safe and happy reading.